Welcome back. Now, the book centers around a South African-born man recruited into the CIA and how his past and current and future relationship with the doctors and patients in the waiting room form the foundation of his backstory. Titled The Waiting Room, this novel reaches back to the war in Angola in 1989, the war in Mozambique in the late 80s, and develops into a multi-level story across Africa, Europe, Asia, and the United States. Now, to help us unpack this thrilling debut book, Gideon Marx is here in the studio to tell us more about The Waiting Room. Gideon, good morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the
It's so good to have you here. I mean, speak to us about The Waiting Room, where the idea to pen the story comes from.
Well, I think, you know, I've always been a great reader and a lover of stories. I've always had a very deep interest in military history, in history particularly, and particularly history as it relates to South Africa and how it relates then to an international context. So I was quite excited to put together the various aspects of the book and try and tie in on an international level a little bit of a South African taste to it, a little bit of a South African flair to it, which...
The opening line in the book, life is often a waiting game. I mean, speak to us about this line and the, you know, the precedence it sets for the rest of the book.
Well, I think, you know, what that opening line is sort of indicative of is that there's a lot of time, we spend a lot of our time waiting for certain things to happen. I mean, I was waiting for this interview, you waiting for this promotion, you waiting for this person to call you, you waiting for to get married or for the child to be born. And that can become for a lot of people quite the driving force in their lives. You know, the absolute tragic element of that is you'll meet some people who'll say, oh, I can't wait to go on pension. So it's like you spend a lot of your time waiting for certain things to happen, waiting for your life to move forward. And the book kind of does move that concept a little bit forward and take it through, that there's a lot of time where the hero in the book is spending time waiting for certain events to happen, whether it's on an international political level, whether it's in his personal capacity. So that's really the sort of concept that was all about.
And a lot happens in this waiting room. I mean, paint a picture for us of what this room looks like.
Well, the waiting room in the book is very much like any waiting room that any person has ever been to. You have the tired magazines that are long past relevance that everyone has flicked through. You have a bunch of patients sitting there, ill people, some ill, some imagined, some not really that ill, flustered front office staffs trying to deal with irritated people. We all know what we like when we're ill and we're not feeling good. Patience is not at its best. And that's the sort of environment that the waiting room, if you will, that then plays a central role. And our protagonist or our hero, Mitch, he's friends with one of the doctors there from a long time. He goes there to pay a visit to his friend. And there's some other characters that play quite an important role in the book that are also in the waiting room there with him. And the story kind of develops from there. I don't want to say too much or give away anything. But it's really the typical waiting room that we've all been in 100 times.
I mean, you explore several issues and themes in this book. I mean, you touch on philosophy, there's society, there's politicians as well. Talk to us about the different themes and merging them into this one book.
Well, you know, for me, on the one level, the book is all about soldiering and special forces operations and that sort of stuff. I've always had tremendous admiration for these soldiers that are, if you will, the best of the best, or sort of operate at a level that you and I just simply couldn't comprehend. You know, whether it's the British SAS or the British Special Boat Service, which we're all familiar with, the SEALs that everyone talks about, that you always see all over TV and all the movies and that sort of thing. Or even in South African context, you know, we had the reconnaissance commandos or the recce's. I've always been incredibly, a lot of admiration for people who can really sort of grit it through and go through that sort of thing. So on the one level, the book is about that. It's a real sort of action and a lot of things happening on a geopolitical scale that tie into events in South Africa and all that sort of thing. But I also try to engage or incorporate in that a little bit of philosophy, a little bit about the human condition, where we are. You know, we often see in headlines, the good guys got the bad guys. You know, but the challenge often is to try and understand and to ask questions around, you know, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Oftentimes the people presented to us maybe as the good guys might in fact not be the good guys. You know, what is good, what is evil, What is our understanding of good and evil? I think, for instance, of Solzhenitsyn's book, The Gulag Archipelago, where he famously said that the line between good and evil runs not between states, not between political parties, not even between classes, but the line between good and evil runs straight through the heart of every one of us. We all know what it feels like to do something you shouldn't be doing. You don't need mom to tell you that you shouldn't be doing that. We know it. And we all know just how fantastic it feels to actually be doing the right thing and how good that makes you feel. So I'm trying to incorporate that concept there, trying to bring in a bit of philosophy, and I'm hoping that the reader would go away from the story and say, well, that was a good story, but there's also maybe one or two things to think about and to consider on a political level, on a geopolitical level. What are our leaders doing? What are they telling us? How far is that from the truth? What is the motivation beyond what is being said or what is being projected? It's really very much a sort of multi-level thing, and the book starts out in South Africa. It does go back to our history, our unfortunate history in Angola and Mozambique. It then goes all the way through to the White House. There's some European history in there. So it's really a sort of multi-level geopolitical thriller, action thriller, if you will.
I mean, speak to us about how the process and experience was like for you, given the fact that this is your debut novel. I mean, what lessons came with this experience and this part of your life?
Well, if I can, I was in a very different sort of education background or education or growing up environment. I went to school in Benoni in the East Rand, which I'm sure many people would sort of associate with Charlize Theron, or Theron, or Tron, as we used to call her in the days. So I was at school in more or less the same time as what she was in Benoni. I unfortunately didn't spend too much time at school there. I was in a very fortunate position, thanks to my father, that we spent a lot of time in northern Botswana, in the Okavango Delta, in Botswana. We used to take guests up there, and we had people from all over the world coming in there and interacting with various people. I was a young boy, I was only 12 or 13 years old. So I had this opportunity of sitting around the fire at night and listening to these men from all walks of life tell their stories and give you a little bit of background, which was just the greatest education that you could possibly imagine. We had one guy there, George Peach. He was actually a navigator in a Lancaster bomber that used to fly over during the war and bomb Germany and all that sort of stuff. And he got shot down once or twice, parachuted into France and managed to escape using, the French resistance. So I had a very sort of broad and a different upbringing or education, if you will. All these stories around the fire, which really kind of engaged and lit the spark for me to love these stories and retell these stories and write this sort of thing. So I had all that sort of input, and then my dad and my mom really encouraged me to do a lot of reading. I really loved history at school and started engaging and reading the various books, Dr. Peter Becker's books, all these books on South African history. But I started to see that there was a little bit of a sort of snake in the grass, if you will. I remember South African history was something I was really very fond of. And reading about the Zulu Wars and the Boer Wars and the Anglo Wars and all that. And it was quite interesting to see that, for me, something that was an absolutely great achievement was the Battle of Isandlwana, where these Zulu warriors defeated what was at the time the superpower of the world. And it was sort of swept under the carpet. It wasn't really front and center, because at the time it wasn't politically the sort of driving force, and that kind of raised a few. I started to think to myself, what one needs to do is embrace what you're reading, embrace what you're taught at school, but perhaps sort of start to ask a few questions and maybe read a bit broader and look a bit and just sort of try and get an understanding of sort of what it is that they're trying to sell you here.
All right. Gideon, we could talk for hours.
Yeah, no,
time is up. I can tell you're a great storyteller. Gideon Marx, thank you so much for talking to us.
You're more than welcome.
That was our Sunday morning guest author, Gideon Marx, and we are just in conversation about his new book titled The Waiting Room.